Right, so I've been loading up the Castlevania Dominus Collection to start playing through these games, and so far it's been a fun ride. Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, a Haunted Castle remake. Great games, fantastic games. And then we come to Order of Ecclesia, and I figure, let's start fresh, start from scratch, clear away the old save file that I played for about 5 minutes, and start a new game. Enjoy the surprising voiceover of the opening scroll, and not even 5 text boxes into the intro, I start to feel a bit tired. I begin to doze off for a bit, and next thing you know, I wake up and it's 3 in the morning. I started playing at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. This game's intro literally put me to sleep, and this isn't a freak occurrence. I tried to start this thing 5 or 6 times late at night, evening, during a park trip, dozed off every single time. I was in my car during the park trip a couple months back. Don't worry, I was parked and not driving because I'm not a complete moron. And yes, I'm kind of exaggerating with the exception of the opening anecdote, that actually did happen. But the point being that when it comes to these characters and this whole narrative in general, the entire endeavor is just dull, and we haven't gotten to the gameplay yet, which, well, I've got some issues. Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, released in 2008 for Nintendo DS and the final Castlevania game to grace the system. And yeah, I'm not going to mince any words here, this game is bad and I do not like it. Now let me lay down a bit of ice here. Is the game terrible? No. Is it broken? No. Is it such an absolute affront to game design or artistic impression that it mass aborts babies? Oh, now we're being silly. On the surface, from a base level, Order of Ecclesia is about as functional and polished as any other Igavania outing up to that point. It retains the overall style of play, the over-reliance of side quests, the over-reliance of grinding for shit, and other bits and bobs. On the base level of Igavania outings, Order of Ecclesia plays about as competently as any other entry in that series or genre, and I think it's safe to say we're not going to be needing one of these at the conclusion of this video session. But all that being said, well, I guess we have to gather the kids around the fireplace because I've got a little bit of a story to tell you. So we gotta go back to 1997 when Castlevania Symphony of the Night was first released on the PlayStation. I never got to play the game until years later, and I've told this story before in the Symphony video we did a couple years back, but a buddy of mine did get to play the game, and when I asked him about it, he summed up the experience in 4 words that stuck with me. Great game, shit Castlevania. Now keep in mind this was coming from someone whose prior Vania experience was... So while most people embraced this new vision of sorts for the Castlevania series, others like my friend who uttered those very words did not. Even I initially didn't really care for Symphony and only played it because of the brand name on the cover. Without that, I probably would have never bothered. But over the years I've come to realize that his dislike towards Symphony, as well as my general ambivalence, related to what it was not rather than what it was. The game might not have been the Castlevania of old that we were familiar with, but there were enough elements and traces of those classic titles that it could fit in with the rest of the series, and, you know, I think it might be okay, I guess. So I bring this up because a little over a decade later, when Order of Ecclesia was first announced and they showed off trailers and previews and such, I was less than enthused, to put it one way. It looked the part on the surface because it's stock Igavania. He ain't gonna stray from what worked. Ask him to do a game based on Care Bears or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and you'll get the same game pretty much. Iga has a specific style of game that he's best known for. Sure, he's done other stuff, but when one thinks of Koji Igarashi, this is the style of game that he's most associated with. And by proxy of his role as the sort of Castlevania overseer at the time, this was pretty much the house style of game. And I'd like to think that in 2008 I was still largely anticipating new Castlevania content that I could potentially play, and the guy had a pretty decent track record. Sure, there were a couple 3D games that were mixed bags of sorts, and also Castlevania Judgment was going to be a thing, and the less said about that miserable pile of malcontent the better. But I dug the GBA games, I thought Portrait of Ruin was fantastic, so I had no doubt about the style or the gameplay, it was the content that drew concern for me. There were no Belmonts, there were no whips. What's this order? Who's this girl? What's that thing? What's this? What's that? All sorts of questions that popped up in my head. So needless to say, I wasn't really excited about this one, but I was willing to give it a chance because it's a Castlevania game, and the series has not steered me down the wrong path before. So finally it comes out, I buy the game, I play it for a few days, and I eventually get to the part where the girl sacrifices herself for the greater good and the game ends. So naturally, my first thought was, what the fuck is this? What are these glyph things? Why are these characters so bland? Why are these people stuck in crystals? Why am I playing this? Why did I even buy this game? And then it hit me. I realized that I was in the same frame of mind that my buddy was with his first experience playing Symphony of the Night. And suddenly those 4 words that he used to sum up that title popped up in my head to sort of sum up this title. Great game, shit Castlevania. Except I'm not sure if I could call Order of Ecclesia a great game. Hell, I'm struggling to call this game good even. Sure, there were some elements that I liked, such as not being stuck in a castle setting for the whole game, but there were other elements that just left a bad taste in my mouth. More than anything, this simply didn't feel like a Castlevania game. This felt like something Igarashi had left over on the side, dusted it off, slapped the Castlevania name on the cover and added a couple references to make it seem relevant somewhat, and voila, hot new Vania for the masses. At least with Symphony, you had some natural ties to the series lore. The game had you playing as Alucard, the half-vampire son of Dracula, a character previously established in Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, of which there are a couple references made to that game in particular. It is a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood and features the heroes of that game as major characters in this one. Hell, the first few minutes of the game is basically a recreation of that game's final battle between Count Dracula and Richter Belmont. There are bits and pieces that make Symphony a significant title in the series, even if the core gameplay is a stark departure from what came before. Order of Ecclesia really doesn't have that. It makes one reference to the Belmonts being AWOL, but you take that out of the picture and what's left?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
You've got this order trying to prepare for the coming of Dracula, and this girl Shanoa who's the key to all this. And if they could get Shanoa working because she's a funnier character than we've ever had in the movies, and... oh wait, I'm reading the wrong script. So this order, Ecclesia, does this thing, Angry White Boy comes in and messes everything up, and in the process Shanoa loses all her memories and emotions, but somehow retains all her fighting abilities, and this somehow makes her a deep character with substance. Uh-huh. I'm pretty sure Rusty has more substance than Shanoa does. Nobody is going to get that. Well, I suppose we should talk about the actual game now, because I do have other grievances to bring up along the way. Order of Ecclesia does something different for an Igavania title and has you traversing other places outside Dracula's castle, which seems absolutely revolutionary, all things considered. The way it works is that you have this sort of stage select gimmick, you know, like that one game there, and each stage represents a new location comprising its own little map. Sometimes the map is short and straightforward, while others are a little more involved. And so as you play through these mini-maps, more locations open up for you to explore. I suppose I should applaud Order of Ecclesia for taking me outside the castle in one of these Igavania things, and for what it's worth, this stage select format does make things more convenient in warping to specific areas more quickly. Though part of me wishes this was all one massively interconnected world that you could travel through naturally, and that the stage select gimmick was reserved for those teleporter things you'd come across later down the road, but perhaps hardware limitations necessitated this alternative means, which is adequate, for now at least. As alluded to earlier, Shanoa's main shtick, and by extension the main shtick of this whole game, is her ability to absorb glyphs, which are these glowing white things shrouded in darkness. Glyphs represent your offensive capabilities. They are your standard attacks, your special attacks, and also serve as passive abilities that can be enabled whenever you want, whether it be stat boost, slow recovery, or even enhanced mobility options like this magnetic field that lets you slingshot across areas or being able to pass through walls at specific points. All these things cost mana from your mana meter, which does regenerate fairly quickly, which means that yes, even your basic melee attacks where you're swinging swords and hammers and shit, that also costs mana, effectively making your mana meter double as a stamina meter of sorts. Yeah, I'll get back to this in a bit. But that basically means you have no equipable weapons in the traditional sense and are thus relegated to body armor, headgear, footwear, and 2 accessories. and even these are often in limited supply, with the drop rate from enemies being rather abysmal, and the one general store being, well, again, we'll get back to that. On paper, the concept of acquiring glyphs and gaining different powers from them is fairly similar to the Sorrow Souls or the Shards of Bloodstained. However, the key difference is that while you automatically gain souls upon their release, Shinoa needs to absorb the glyphs manually. This is done by holding up on the D-pad for as long as it takes to absorb the glyph. The process can be interrupted, however, and so if you take a hit, you'll have to try again before the glyph fades away. While glyphs usually emerge from destroyed reticules or enemy drops, you could sometimes absorb a glyph that appears during an enemy attack, which, if done successfully, can negate said attack while giving you a new glyph or a boost of hearts. Yes, they brought back hearts as a separate counter for your sub-weapons of sorts, which by default is a sizable air bubble that covers a fart's range and does negligible damage. However, if you have a specific glyph combinations equipped, say a specific melee weapon with a specific elemental attack for example, you'll execute a more advanced attack that does significantly more damage. Obviously, there's a bunch of these for you to discover and experiment with, but I don't know. I find that some of the basic glyph attacks tend to be more useful at times, and because these uses a good number of hearts, they feel more like lame duck item crashes than anything particularly useful. Which probably explains why glyphs cost mana to use, which ostensibly turns it into a stamina meter, which really sucks if you happen to get cursed, which drains your mana meter momentarily and leaves you effectively defenseless unless you have an uncursed item on hand, whereas before it only meant zero access to sub-weapons, and now, I don't know, try not to get cursed, everyone. Yeah, so I have mixed feelings about this whole setup, and again, I need to stress that in terms of the base gameplay, the usual roaming around the castle, hitting enemies, popping numbers, building levels for minuscule stat boosts, putting up with abhorrent drop rates, that sort of thing. This is typical Igavania fare that is largely consistent with what came before. I will not complain about controls being broken or severe flaws that literally break the game, because none of that is the case here, nor really should it after several iterations of the same basic formula. Need I bring up NES Mega Man again? Same basic gameplay with minor tweaks here and there throughout all 6 titles. It's largely the content around that base which defines each individual entry. And so with that in mind, let's talk about the content around Order of Ecclesia's base gameplay. I do not like the glyph system. Just flat out don't care for it. The idea of absorbing these things manually seemed like less of a quirk and more like something that was done solely to differentiate this from Sorrow's soul system, which was just kill the vessel, get the soul. Here you have to be on safe ground because you can't just do it while airborne, and the process takes a long time to absorb, and this stretch of time never changes. No matter how many numbers you make go up in the stats, and believe me when I say that I've never played a game with RPG elements where a stat increase feels negligible more so than this one, none of them will make your absorption skill work any faster. I like the idea of being able to absorb glyphs to negate attacks, and these are obviously well telegraphed, but the mechanic itself, especially late in the game, eventually got tiresome, overstayed its welcome, and you just wanted to be done with it. And then there's Ecclesia's stamina meter that they try to pass off as mana, that thing that drains whenever you perform a basic attack. So we're doing this now all of a sudden? After years of not doing this, we're imposing a limit over how many times we could spam your basic stock attack. Granted, your base attacks that you absorb can vary from the standard melees to more lavish projectile attacks, and I can understand if you need a refresh from those, but seriously, I can't swing a sword more than a couple times before their meter runs out, and I have to wait for it to charge? What kind of stupid shit is that? No, I don't care if this becomes less of an issue once you're at higher levels and you have more mana to play with. There's no reason for this to be an issue at all. Again, maybe for the more special attacks, but not for the basic shit. It'd be like playing a classic Vania game where each whip strike costs you a heart, and once you run out of hearts you can't use the whip no more. I mean, get the fuck out of here with that noise. That's stupid. Fuck off. Some of the combo attacks gained from equipping different glyphs can be fun to use, while others can be underwhelming, and then there's a wide number of combos that results in a shit bubble attack, which makes experimenting with these things a lottery at best. Even your enhanced mobility you eventually acquire feels underwhelming. A magnetic field latching onto hooks that can you use to slingshot across the room is a neat idea on paper, but using a D-pad to aim yourself is somewhat problematic. Maybe this is me just being spoiled by the likes of Metroid Dread and its 360 aiming, which would have been perfect for something like this. Or maybe this is reminding me of another Castlevania game with hooks in it that did a better job of using those things than this game did. Oh, and eventually you get wings, which negates all that bullshit anyway, and you didn't even need a Red Bull. Now all this might be picking over trivial details, but enough of these add up to the point where you realize that this glyph system that the whole game is built around is a dreadful hindrance that detracts from the gameplay. If it were something that could be skipped over in favor of business as usual, fine. Except for the stamina meter stuff, the absorption stuff, the glyph union stuff that cost hearts that are no better than the normal attacks that are more varied. This ultimately soured a typically generic Igavania outing immensely, and if that were my only grievance with the game, as major as it may be, then fine, I'll put up with some rubbish if there was other stuff to look forward to that make the whole thing worthwhile. Yeah, about that. Right, so as you're playing through these maps, you'll come across these crystal things with people trapped inside, whom you can free by absorbing the glyph hovering above said crystals. These are the missing villagers whom you have to rescue in order to not get the ending where Shanoa croaks at the end. Now for what it's worth, the game does give hints on the whereabouts of these villagers you skipped on, though what doesn't help matters is some of these folks being sealed away in hidden rooms, which kinda sucks, but hey, at least it's not needing to farm for vital souls or anything like that. This is easily attainable with a bit of searching around, so thank heavens for small favors, I suppose. Once you've saved all the villagers and defeated Albus,
you win!
You'll unlock the second portion of the game, which unsurprisingly involves exploring Dracula's castle and doing the usual Igavania thing. But now with less story bits because either all the key secondary characters are dead, or you're left doing fetch quests for the villagers so that they can either give you free stuff or add stuff to buy at the village shop. Though you'll want to complete some of the side quests if you want to stock up on items to purchase at the shop, because otherwise it'll be slim pickings. Once you get to Dracula's castle, it's business as usual. You're seeking out a couple key items to unlock the final segment as well as some wings for easier maneuverability. You'll eventually confront the Count himself, who only has one form. Doesn't even have the courtesy to change his head to a skull for fuck's sake, but he does change up his pattern at a pinch. And then you beat Dracula, Shanoa and Albus get one last moment before he goes bye-bye, the castle crumbles per usual, Shanoa goes bye-bye, never to be seen again, Ecclesia is but a forgotten memory, and why did I waste my time? No, seriously, why did I waste my time playing this if that was the good ending that isn't all that good, felt like another bad ending? Wouldn't a better ending be Shanoa returning to the village and being embraced and thanked by the villagers and welcomed as one of their own? Essentially losing one family of sorts while gaining another in the process? Then that one smile at the end would have been earned, but instead we get, "Smile at you." So you beat Dracula, you get the underwhelming good ending, roll the credits, and you unlock the obligatory secondary character mode that's more of a side thing than anything of genuine substance. In this case, you play as Albus, whose name sounds similar to that of former NWA World's Heavyweight Champion and current SmackDown General Manager Nick Aldis, who once debuted in TNA as Brutus Magnus, where he wore a gladiator getup. This is somewhat relevant because I got the two names confused several times during this recording, and this has led to many flubbed takes. And also, this is infinitely more interesting than anything involving Order of Ecclesia, but I digress. Anyway, Albus is the answer to anyone who has played a Castlevania game and wondered why Simon Belmont, lols, has a whip. Why can't he have a gun? Or a machine gun? Well, if that's you quoting an old Armake 21 video, then this is the mode for you. Fuck me, I miss Armake. R.I.P. So yeah, Albus has a gun. A rapid-fire pistol as a standard attack, a two-way wavy projectile attack, a max projectile attack, and a diamond crystal thing. All these attacks cost MP, which I actually don't mind because it's a gun and you need to reload and shit. Albus also has a kick attack that costs hearts. He can also do the usual super leap thing by pressing L button, and he can warp anywhere on screen by using the stylus, which is kinda nice to use and abuse. Hey, as far as secondary characters go, Albus is at least kind of fun to go trigger happy on all the monsters and bosses. Almost made it worth slothing through the main game. Almost. It's just too bad that this mode sucks because you're playing every level in sequential order. Oh hey, just like in the main mode. Fuck me. But isn't the secondary character mode the thing where you just go about your business, do whatever you want, go where you want, with some exceptions here and there? Why can't I play all these places right out of the gate? If there was a story purpose to playing through all these levels in order, then sure, I'd get it, but there isn't. I mean, there's no story, there's no objective, you're just going through these maps, building your non-visible experience up, collecting extension capsules found in chests, and that's it. The idea of opening up stages one at a time, I guess it's old school. We don't want to jump the gun or anything, or just start off at Dracula's castle or whatever, but when I play these secondary characters in past Igavanias that feel much more free and open, and then you give me this. Also, at the risk of blatant anachronism, I played Chronicles of the Wolf, a recent release that had multiple locations and maps for you to travel in, but it's all one connected world that you have to walk through, and thus the linear progression of sorts almost makes sense. But this isn't that. This is a Mega Man style stage select. You can't really do that here. And hey, if you don't think it's fair that I'm saying they should have done this the same way as a game that didn't exist yet, I'll do you one better. I'll back up a bit so I don't peek the mic here. Give me a couple secs, right? Alright, ready? Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge on fucking Game Boy! Remember that one? That had a stage select too with 4 castles, and once you cleared those, you got the last castle. Do the same thing here! Reveal all the minor locations, go through all that, beat the bosses, and once you've cleared some condition of sort, then you unveil the demon castle and do your final approach. They figured this shit out on fucking Game Boy, for fuck's sake! Why is this shit so fucking hard to figure out? Why am I upset about all this? Why is the dog upset? Poor thing's barking in the background there. You made the dog upset. Fuck you people. Oh, I'm losing my goddamn mind here. Okay, alright. I got that out of my system. Anyways. Well, I think I've hammered the gameplay enough. Let's talk about the presentational material. The good news, for some people at least, is that they veered away from the anime look of the first 2 DS games, and while they couldn't get that Kojima person to do the portraits, the person they did get manages a suitably gothic style for these character portraits that pop up during the talking segments. Granted, not the most exciting character designs, but then again the characters themselves are rather unexciting and dull narratively speaking, so I guess it fits, and admittedly after a while, the villagers eventually grew on me. More so than the main players. Maybe you should have made the whole game about them instead of... never mind. As for the in-game stuff, well, it's business as usual. Your usual assortment of smoothly animated player characters to go along with some fiendishly new boss creatures, the occasional lead background effect, and the usual assortment of Recyclevania. Which goes further not just in terms of recycled content from past games, but some areas, especially later on, start to feel a bit samey and rehashed in some regards, which, to be fair, Portrait of Ruin did the same thing, so I'm like, whatever in this regard. You gotta work within your means, and generally speaking, the game still looks fine. So it's, like I said, business as usual in this regard. Sound output is a bit of a mixed bag. Of course, you've got the usual array of sound effects put to good use, some familiar, some not so familiar. Although I'd like to know why there's a water phone greeting me every time I enter a new area. Almost like I'm expecting Gordon Ramsay to pop out and criticize the local cuisine that's buried behind a wall somewhere. Fucking roll! There are some vocal bites that pop up here and there, mostly attack calls and minor greetings from minor characters. Nothing special really, but it's a thing that exists and that's about it. Which I'm afraid may also apply to the overall musical output, as Order of Ecclesia may very well boast the weakest soundtrack to be featured in a Castlevania game. I don't want to totally knock Mishiro Yamane here because she has contributed plenty of great music for this franchise, and even her bloodstained output started to grow on me after a while, and the last thing I want to do is accuse her of phoning things in, but I'm sorry. This sounds like a bunch of stuff she had laying around on the side that was done for a lark, and when Iga needed music, she just gave him this stuff. None of the tracks stand out. They're either all terribly generic compositions that hardly fit the stages they play in, or they're a collection of dull lounge music tunes that are better served in waiting rooms. Some of these tunes get used in multiple areas, which only emphasize the weakness of these tracks. Even the stronger favorites that people crow as the highlights, Ebony Wings and An Empty Tomb, are still somewhat weak sounding and don't hold up to even some of the mid-tier tracks in franchise history. In that regard, there is a couple of remixed tracks used here, Tower of Dolls from Chronicles and Riddle from Dracula's Curse, both basically lesser versions of their original iterations. And if you manage certain conditions, you can obtain records that let you play modified versions of music from the original Castlevania game on NES. Which is all I need is further reminders of much better games in this series I could be playing right about now. Seems like a running theme today. Okay, so I will do you a solid and take about 60 seconds or less to disassociate my feelings on the subject matter at hand and try to give you as unbiased and as dispassionate of a final thought as possible for you folks who want to drop off and leave this on something resembling a high note. So, is Castlevania Order of Ecclesia worth playing? Well, if you enjoy playing this sort of completely interchangeable open-world exploratory, generically branded Metroidvania-labeled slurry that are, let's be real, a dime a dozen these days, you'll probably find some merit of enjoyment out of this one. Hell, you might even take a liking to the mechanics, the overall narrative, or even the characters and what have you. And again, you have tightly controlled, well-polished gameplay that follows a firmly established format from a trusted pedigree that has, up to a certain point, done no wrong, and forms a very solid foundation for the rest of the package. Simply put, taken as another disposable game of this ilk within this somewhat bloated genre, Order of Ecclesia delivers on that base level. And for those who enjoy Koji Igarashi's particular brand of Vania, this is certainly another one of those, and on that base level at the very least, is just as solid as the rest of them. And now that we got that particular business out of the way, Order of Ecclesia was the first game in the series where I seriously questioned the future of the Castlevania franchise, wondering if the only new games to look forward to would be this kind of dreck. This was back in 2008, and to paint a wider picture here, I first played Castlevania II Simon's Quest at a friend's house back in 1989, and for better or worse, that was my entry point into the larger Castlevania series, which I've since made an effort to play as many of the games as I could. Obviously, the original 8-bit and 16-bit titles which laid the foundation and iconography of the series' identity that was eventually cast aside, perhaps unceremoniously, in favor of the more open-ended toss shit to a wall and see what sticks exploratory format spearheaded by Koji Igarashi for multiple iterations that eventually, begrudgingly embraced that transition, and honestly never really had much cause to question that direction until Order of Ecclesia. A game that didn't click with me in preview blurbs, and even when I got around to playing it the first time in 2008 and going a couple hours into it and getting that bad ending, wasn't enjoying it, the story was dull, the gameplay was dreadful, made me question why this was even a Castlevania title other than it followed the same format and also recycled some old assets. And I had never touched the game again until the release of the recent Dominus Collection, where, in undergoing this project, I figure I'd give it another shot. After all, it's been a decade or so, maybe I missed something back then, maybe I didn't give the game a fair shake. That's what I wanted to believe anyway. So I dived into the game, determined to give it as much of a fair shake as it deserved, played through the whole deal, did the 2 hidden dungeons, played Nick Aldis mode, did not skimp on the experience, even played through the whole thing a second time, which I rarely do for these type of games. And through it all, I was waiting, perhaps even hoping, for that moment where things would click and I would start to realize the brilliance that had eluded me years earlier, hoping the page would turn and I'd see the same great game in Order of Ecclesia that the masses were apparently seeing. But that moment never came. In fact, the more I play of Ecclesia, the more I began to sour on it. Whether it was the cumbersome glyphs, the tiresome fetch quests, the trademark piss-poor drop rates, the bland forgettable characters, the ultimately trivial and pointless narrative. It was the content around the largely consistent yet ultimately sterile base gameplay that became my main source of contention. It was not simply a matter of dislike, but a matter of none of this stuff being any good or doing more harm to the experience than making any effort to actually enhance it. Whatever warped sense of self-imposed obligation possessed me to power through this dreck to the very end could only exist because of the franchise that it's associated with. A franchise that's been near and dear to me since 1989. I've said this about Symphony of the Night once, and funny enough, people have made this statement regarding Mercury Steam's Lords of Shadow sub-series, but it fits my takeaway with Order of Ecclesia almost perfectly, both back in 2008 and even today. And that is, if this game didn't have the Castlevania branding, if it had just been called Order of Ecclesia or some variation of that title, I would not have bothered with this game. This would have been an easy skip in 2008. That's how much of a Castlevania follower I used to be back in the day, that I would play a game that I wasn't initially excited about and was unfortunately proven right. And in 2008, having played both this and coupled with the absolute fucking dumpster fire that was Castlevania Judgment, pretty much soured me on the whole Igavania experience. And if this were to be the future of Castlevania going forward, well hey, I'm sure at least the kids will be happy with their annual serving of quote-unquote Metroidvania slurry that'll eat up no matter how rubbish it is. Harmony of Despair says hi, by the way. My only shots fired in that direction, for whatever that's worth. For me though, in 2008, I had my fill. My feeling was just stick with the old stuff that got me into Castlevania in the first place, which wasn't that hard to do, and Konami can get back to me when they decide to pull a Mega Man 9 and take this series back to its roots, which they almost did once before Lords of Shadow and Pachinkos came along. And in 2026, as I'm recording the back end of this exceedingly long video review thing, I'm just happy to get that Shinoa-sized elephant out of the room, put it out to pasture, leave the rotting corpse in the rearview mirror, and never look back again. There are 4 other games on that Dominus Collection that I could still play. No big loss. Speaking of which, 2026, of course, Castlevania turns 40 in September. We're getting a new game that has me intrigued for better or worse. Cautious optimism is my general feeling in regards to the upcoming Belmont's Curse, which is a step above the unease that I had with Order of Ecclesia back in 2008. And that, as they say, is a wrap. Finally, in more ways than one.